I had always prided myself on being someone who lived life without a care, someone who didn't take things too seriously. My friends and I were always out, enjoying ourselves, and I thought Ethan, my boyfriend, was just the same. We had been together for over a year, and I loved him deeply, but I also loved the freedom that came with our relationship. He was my safe place, the one I could always count on, but sometimes, I felt like I was invincible. That feeling, though, was a mistake. Ethan was different from most guys I'd dated before. He wasn't the type to hang out with his friends all the time or go out drinking. He preferred quiet nights in, just the two of us. It was one of the things I liked about him. He made me feel like home. He wasn't possessive or controlling, which made our relationship feel so easy. He trusted me, and I trusted him. But in hindsight, I wonder if I ever truly understood the depth of that trust. One evening, after a casual dinner with a few close friends, we all gathered in the living room. The atmosphere was light-hearted, filled with laughter and chatter. Some of my friends were guys I'd known for years, close friends, some of them like family. Ethan didn't know them as well, but he was always polite when they came over. I noticed, though, that sometimes, when I laughed a little too loudly at something one of my guy friends said or when I spent a bit too much time talking to one of them, Ethan's expression would shift. He'd smile, but it was different from his usual grin, like he was holding something back, maybe even a bit uncomfortable. I thought nothing of it, chalking it up to his tendency to overthink. But it was more than that. After everyone left that night, Ethan and I were sitting on the couch, our legs tangled under the blanket, watching some random movie. I felt carefree, the afterglow of a fun evening still lingering. I playfully nudged him with my elbow, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, you need to stop being so jealous. You know they're just friends, right?" I said with a teasing smile, looking at him sideways. Ethan looked at me, his brow furrowed. "I'm not jealous," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I laughed, rolling my eyes. "Oh, please. You overreact every time I spend time with them. It's just guys, Ethan. Relax." He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. His gaze remained distant, and I could tell he wasn't taking it the same way I was. His silence stretched on for a few seconds before he shifted, clearly uncomfortable, but still trying to maintain his calm. "You always say that," he muttered, almost to himself. "That I overreact. But it's not about them. It's about you. It's about how you don't understand how it feels to have someone so close to you and feel like they don't see you the way you see them." I tilted my head, not quite grasping what he meant. He had been a bit distant lately, but I didn't think it was anything serious. He'd always been a bit insecure when it came to relationships, and I told myself it was just one of those moments where he needed reassurance. But instead of offering it, I brushed it off. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad, Ethan. You know I love you, right?" I said, trying to lighten the moment. "You've got to trust me more. It's nothing serious." But Ethan didn't seem to relax. His eyes met mine, but they were unreadable. "I trust you," he said softly. "But you never take me seriously when I say how I feel. It's like you don't care that it bothers me." I sat there, confused. I never intended to make him feel that way. But as I looked at him, I began to see a side of him I hadn't paid much attention to before, one that wasn't just about being protective or jealous, but one that was deeply vulnerable, a side I had inadvertently ignored. He didn't say anything else after that. We just sat there in silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between us. I thought it would blow over. I thought I'd made my point clear, and he'd let it go. But he didn't. It was just the beginning of what would turn out to be a much bigger issue than I had ever anticipated. The days following that conversation were awkward, to say the least. At first, I didn't think much of it. Ethan was a bit quiet, sure, but I assumed he would snap out of it, like he always did. He was the type to internalize his emotions, keeping them bottled up until they eventually slipped out in one way or another. I figured it was just another one of those times, and I could wait it out. But the silence between us grew longer. It wasn't just in our conversations anymore, it crept into everything we did. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work or something else unrelated to us. But I knew deep down that something was off. The way Ethan would look at me, almost with a guarded expression, made my stomach turn. It wasn't anger, it was something else, something deeper. I noticed it most when we were together in the evenings, just the two of us. When we'd watch TV or try to have dinner, there was this palpable distance between us. The warmth I was used to, the easy flow of our shared moments, was slipping away. He would always be a few inches further from me on the couch, as though he was trying to create some sort of barrier. I'd try to close the gap, to reach out for his hand or brush my fingers against his arm, but he'd pull away subtly, without saying anything. It wasn't like him at all. I couldn't figure out what had changed. I had apologized for the joke I made, told him I didn't mean to hurt him. But the apology didn't seem to have the effect I thought it would. If anything, it felt like he was just waiting for me to do something more. He'd become quieter, and whenever I mentioned anything about my guy friends or even brought up the topic of hanging out with them, his jaw would tighten, and his eyes would darken. It wasn't that he was visibly upset, but there was a palpable shift. He wouldn't argue or shout, he'd just withdraw. I felt like I was walking on eggshells around him, constantly second-guessing my every word, afraid that anything I said might set him off. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to fix it. He wasn't telling me what was wrong. He wasn't confronting me like I expected him to. Instead, he just retreated into himself, and I was left alone, trying to figure out what was happening inside his mind. One evening, we were at a party with a few of my friends. I didn't think it was anything special, it was just one of those casual gatherings where everyone caught up and had a few drinks. Ethan came with me, but his presence felt like an afterthought. He was there physically, but emotionally, he might as well have been a million miles away. I watched as he sat at the edge of the group, picking at his drink, occasionally joining in on the conversation but never fully engaging. As the night went on, I found myself laughing a little too loudly at a joke one of my guy friends made. I hadn't meant to overdo it, but in the moment, I couldn't help it. It was funny, and I just let myself enjoy it. I glanced over at Ethan, hoping to see him smiling or at least enjoying the night with me, but instead, his face was tense, his eyes fixed on the ground. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, it wasn't the first time I'd laughed with my friends. But this time, something in his expression caught me off guard. It wasn't just discomfort, it was hurt. I could see it clearly, even if he didn't say a word. I tried to approach him later, offering a small smile and a gentle nudge. "Hey, are you okay? You've been kind of distant tonight." He turned to look at me, his eyes dark, but still not saying much. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice flat. But I knew he wasn't fine. His words were empty, and his tone even more so. I knew him well enough to tell that something was wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to bridge the gap that had widened between us. By the end of the night, I realized just how bad things had gotten. As we drove home in silence, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my chest, the feeling that we were slipping away from each other, and I had no idea how to stop it. It was like trying to hold water in your hands, no matter how tightly you squeezed, it always slipped through your fingers. It wasn't just about my guy friends anymore, it was about something deeper. Something I wasn't seeing. And I realized, with a sickening feeling, that I might have lost Ethan in a way that I couldn't take back. The tension between Ethan and me continued to escalate over the following days. It wasn't a loud, dramatic conflict that you could easily point to and say, that's where it all went wrong. No, it was much quieter than that. It was the subtle withdrawal, the small silences, the fleeting glances that spoke volumes more than any words could. I had tried to reach out, to fix whatever it was that had gotten under his skin, but every attempt felt like a failure. The more I pushed, the more he withdrew, until it got to the point where even the simplest conversation seemed impossible. I would try to ask him about his day, and he would give me one-word answers, his eyes darting away, as if he couldn't bear to look at me for too long. It was suffocating, this distance, and I was suffocating in it. I remember one evening, after a particularly cold dinner together, I asked him once more what was going on. I had no idea how to get through to him anymore. I felt like I was begging for him to open up, to tell me what was wrong, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "I told you already," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't feel like you care about how I feel." I blinked, stunned by the words. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "I care about you. I always have." "No," he interrupted, his voice now rising, "you care about yourself. You care about your friends, your fun, your freedom. You never stop to think about how I feel when you're out with them or when you're laughing like that with them. I've asked you before, and you always brush it off." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had never seen him this upset before. This wasn't the Ethan I knew, the calm, collected one who always tried to keep things light. This was someone else, someone who had been holding all of his frustration inside, waiting for the right moment to explode. "You've been keeping this inside for so long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let it get to this point?" "I tried," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "But you never listen. You just make it seem like I'm being ridiculous. Like my feelings don't matter." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I never meant to make him feel that way, but the words stuck in my throat. I had been so focused on my own needs and desires that I hadn't truly seen how much I was hurting him. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had dismissed his feelings time and time again, not realizing how much it was tearing him apart. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I watched him, helpless, as he started pacing around the room. He was angry, hurt, and I knew there was nothing I could say that would take back the damage I had done. His eyes were glassy, as if he was holding back tears, but his jaw was clenched tight, refusing to let any vulnerability show. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice breaking. "You think it's all just a joke? That I'm overreacting? But it's not. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when you're laughing with them, sharing jokes that I'm not part of, when I'm just some guy in the background. I don't want to feel like that anymore." I stood there, frozen, as his words sank in. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I finally saw the truth of what was happening between us. Ethan wasn't just hurt because I spent time with my guy friends. He felt invisible, like he wasn't enough for me, like I was prioritizing everything else over him. And that realization stung more than I ever expected. "You're right," I said softly, my voice filled with regret. "I've been selfish. I didn't see it. I'm so sorry." But as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew it was too late. The damage had already been done. Ethan's face hardened, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of finality in his eyes. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. My heart raced, and I stood there, staring after him, knowing that something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. He didn't leave that night, but the emotional distance between us was so wide that I couldn't even begin to figure out how to cross it. The following days were even worse. Ethan's quiet anger simmered, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. Every time I tried to talk to him, to apologize again, he would shut down. And with each passing day, the reality of what I had done, what we had done to each other, settled deeper into my bones. I had never felt so disconnected from someone I loved. It was like we were living in two completely different worlds, both of us unwilling to let go of our pride long enough to reach out. But I knew that if we didn't, if one of us didn't take the first step, we'd be lost forever. The day Ethan left was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't the loud, tear-filled argument I had anticipated. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had expected, where we would both say all the things we had been holding back. Instead, it was quiet, painful in its silence. I woke up that morning to find him already gone. The bed beside me was empty, and the silence in the house felt almost suffocating. I thought maybe he had gone for a walk or run some errands, but as the hours passed, my unease grew. I sent him a text, asking where he was, but received no reply. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. A pit began to form in my stomach, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By the time it was late afternoon, I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I needed answers. I called his best friend, hoping he knew where Ethan was, but his response was unexpected. He didn't tell me anything, was all he said. He just left. Didn't say where he was going. Panic crept into my chest. It was unlike Ethan to leave without a word, without so much as an explanation. He had always been the type to talk things through, even when things weren't going well. The fact that he had walked away without a single word felt like a betrayal in itself. I rushed home, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened between us. What did I do? Where was he? Was he okay? When I walked into our apartment, it felt so still, so empty, like the life had been sucked out of it. His shoes were gone, his jacket missing, and the space we had shared for so long suddenly felt foreign to me. Then, I saw the note. It was on the kitchen counter, folded neatly, almost like he had spent time deciding how to write it. I felt my heart race as I picked it up. I unfolded the piece of paper, the words staring back at me, each one heavy with finality. I can't do this anymore. I've been pretending for too long. You never really listened, and I can't keep feeling like I'm invisible. I need to go. I don't know what's next, but I can't stay here and keep lying to myself. I wish things had turned out differently. Goodbye. I read those words over and over, each time feeling like a stab to my chest. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he was really gone. He hadn't yelled at me or thrown things, but his absence felt more painful than any argument could ever be. It felt like I had lost him in a way that words could never explain. The reality hit me like a cold wave. Ethan had left me not just physically but emotionally months before. All of those little signs, those moments when he pulled away or didn't respond to my attempts to reach out, had all been leading up to this. I had been so focused on defending myself, on justifying my actions, that I hadn't seen how much I was pushing him away. How much I was taking him for granted. I sank to the floor, my knees weak, as the tears finally came. The overwhelming weight of everything I had ignored, everything I had failed to see, came crashing down on me. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop blaming myself for everything that had gone wrong. Ethan wasn't the one who had abandoned us, he had just given up on a relationship where he no longer felt valued. He had tried to make me see it, tried to tell me in his own quiet way that he needed me to listen, that he needed me to care more than I had. The guilt consumed me. I had mocked him, belittled his feelings, and dismissed everything that mattered to him. I had been so caught up in my own world, in my own insecurities, that I hadn't noticed how much I was hurting him. And now, he was gone. I picked up my phone, staring at it for what felt like hours, trying to figure out what to do next. I wanted to call him, to beg him to come back, to explain how much I was sorry, but I knew that it was pointless. Ethan needed space, time to heal, and no amount of pleading would bring him back now. He had made his decision, and I had to respect it. But as the night stretched on, I realized that this wasn't the end, not in the way I had imagined it. This was the beginning of something else, something I didn't fully understand yet. I had lost him, but in that loss, I was starting to understand the importance of what we had, and how much I still had to learn about love, about respect, and about myself. Ethan's departure left a void that nothing could fill. And as I sat there, staring at the empty space around me, I knew I had a long road ahead of me, a road where I had to confront my own mistakes, my own fears, and maybe, just maybe, learn how to rebuild from the broken pieces. Days passed, and the weight of Ethan's absence didn't get any easier to bear. I spent the time replaying everything in my mind, every conversation, every moment I had taken for granted, every time I had dismissed his feelings. It became a cycle of guilt and regret, one I couldn't escape. There were moments when I thought I could move forward, but they were quickly overshadowed by the realization that I had lost him. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could learn from it. I wasn't sure what that learning would look like, but I knew it would take time. I decided to focus on myself, to try to pick up the pieces of my life that had been shattered by my own actions. I reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in a while, started doing things that made me feel more like myself again. I focused on the things that brought me peace, my work, my hobbies, the little joys that had always been there, even when I wasn't paying attention. But despite my efforts, there was a constant ache in my chest, a yearning for the one person I had hurt the most. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. I couldn't stop wondering where he was, if he was okay, and if there was any chance that we could ever fix what had been broken between us. It was on one of those lonely evenings, when I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, that I received a message from him. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a glitch in the system, but when I opened it, there it was, Ethan's name, a simple message, but one that made my heart skip a beat. "I need to talk. Can we meet?" My mind raced. Was this a sign that he wanted closure? Was he coming to tell me that everything was truly over? I had no idea what to expect, but my stomach tightened with a mixture of fear and hope. I agreed to meet him the following evening, my heart pounding the entire time. When I walked into the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, I saw him sitting in the corner, looking like the same Ethan I had known, but not entirely. There was a distance in his eyes, a hardness I hadn't seen before. He wasn't the man I had known in the past, he was someone who had been through something, someone who had learned, just as I had. He looked up as I approached, his face softening just a little when he saw me. He stood up slowly, and I could see that there was still something tentative in his movements, as if he wasn't sure how to navigate this moment. It wasn't the warm reunion I had imagined, but it was real. It was raw. "I didn't know what to expect from this," he began, his voice low but steady. "I didn't know if I should be angry, or if I should just walk away and leave everything behind. But I've had time to think, time to process." I sat down across from him, my hands trembling in my lap. My heart was racing, not knowing where this conversation would lead. But I listened, every word coming from his mouth like a lifeline that I didn't deserve. "I've been angry, a lot," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "And I've been hurt, more than you can imagine. But I also realized that I've been holding on to that anger for too long. And I don't want to keep holding on to it. Not anymore." I swallowed hard, the words hanging between us, filled with unspoken meaning. He wasn't saying he was ready to forgive me, but there was something in his voice, something that made me think maybe, just maybe, there was hope. "I don't expect things to go back to the way they were," he said, taking a deep breath. "But I also don't want to pretend like we didn't mean something to each other. I want to figure out if there's a way to fix this, or at least start over, in a way that's healthier for both of us." I felt the tears well up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where I could finally hear the words that would give me the chance to try to make things right. I had spent so many days in torment, wondering if he would ever want to talk to me again, if I had lost him for good. But here he was, offering me a chance to rebuild, to do better, to learn from the mistakes I had made. "I want to fix this too," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I know I hurt you. I know I wasn't there for you in the way I should have been. And I can't undo that. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try and make things right. To show you that I can be the person you deserve." Ethan nodded, his expression softening as he reached for my hand. "We don't have to figure it all out today," he said gently. "But we can start somewhere." And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what we had lost. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. But this was a beginning. A real one. And for that, I was willing to try.